So I guess we start, or we wait a few minutes. We can start. Okay, hello. Well, hello, my name is Maria Cristina Campos Fuentes. I am very glad to see you here. I am 2 times in the with another computer because I want to see if what I'm sharing is passing or everything correctly in the screen. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our table. It's Colombia and Mexico seen through the arts. This is an interdisciplinary panel and brings together 3 distinct yet contemporary perspectives on the vibrant culture landscapes of Colombia and Mexico through the lenses of literature, poetry, and visual arts. Our presenters will delve into the complexities and nuances of these 2 nations' cultural expressions. Our panel features 3 presentations that showcase the richness and diversity of Colombian and Mexican arts. First, we will explore the literary pulse of Barranquilla through a documentary project of the Brurrafalos Writers Collective. Next, we will examine the work of Rosario Castellanos, focusing on her erotic love poetry, shedding light on the intersections of love and identity. And finally, we will discuss the visual survivance of Chicano murals at Casa Zapata at Stanford University from the mid-70s to the end of the following decade. Each presenter offers a unique window into the cultural heritage of Colombia and Mexico, and I invite you to listen attentively to each presentation and kindly request you to hold the questions until the end of the panel, so we will have our question and answer session, and it will allow each presenter to share their research and expertise without interruption. So the first presenter will be Genny Ballard. Hello, nice meeting you. Dr. Genny Ballard is the Heidelberg Endowed Professor of Spanish at Center College. She holds a PhD on Hispanic Studies from the University of Kentucky and an MAT from the University of Louisville. A returned Peace Corps volunteer, she has led study abroad programs in multiple countries since 2006. Ballard is the current director of the Center Program in Mérida, Mexico. As an NEH scholar, she focused on Jose Marti and immigrant communities. She was a U.S. Fulbright scholar in Colombia, researching intercultural competence, and will return there as a Fulbright specialist next summer. Ballard's research interest includes contemporary Latin American literature, intercultural competence, and language teaching. The title of her paper is Exploring the Literary Pulse of Barranquilla, a documentary project on the Brurrafalos Writers Collective. Ready?
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm going to go ahead and share, and I have practiced, and I'm also sharing sound. And here we go with my presentation. If there is a problem and you can't hear it or you can't see it, then let me know and I'll try and fix it. But this is a presentation about a series of documentaries that I made this summer. I was embedded with the Brurrafalos collective in Barranquilla, Colombia, and they are a group of writers that started working together in 2009, and they write a lot about their own experiences, mostly in coastal Colombia. There are very young authors, so there are teenage authors, and then there are authors in their 60s and their 70s, and they meet every week. They meet every week, and they work together on their writing that they share with one another. They have published 2 collections together, and then members of the group have published many things. So they write about lots of different things, but they write about historical memory, everyday life, and social justice. So the focus of the narratives in the collection that I'm going to talk about today really offer a nuanced exploration of coastal Caribbean culture in Colombia. So today I'm going to show you clips from from my documentary, from the 4 little mini documentaries that came from my work this summer. And in all 4 of them, they refer to this collection, which is their latest collection. They won an award for the Ministry of Culture to be able to publish this. It's called Obsesiones en Manada, and it is inside there are several short stories, and the short stories have a thematic focus on fixations and desires and compulsions, and they their voices come through, and you can see how different the authors are with the story, but they all have a thread of the geographical place is coastal, the Caribbean part of Colombia. The first clip I'm going to share with you is from Edna Manotas, and I'm just going to share starting at minute 8, when she discusses the significance of writing in a group, writing in a collective.
De ahí, entonces es una excelente oportunidad para eso. En ese conocer redes fue que así, con esa perspectiva y apertura, fue que llegué al grupo de literatura, al taller Brurrafalos. Cuando llegué a Barranquilla, más o menos un año después de haber llegado, a través de una amiga que estaba en un curso, me habló del colectivo, el taller de escritura, y llegué al colectivo y fue amor a primera vista. Me quedé, ya llevo bastante tiempo en el grupo. Nosotros somos un taller de escritura, tratamos de impulsar, crecer, leer y sobre todo escribir cuento y novela. Algunos están escribiendo poesía y microrelato, pero lo mío es cuento y novela. Y en el taller realizamos ejercicios de escritura y de lectura que nos permitan desarrollar la habilidad. Juntos ganamos una beca del Ministerio de Cultura en 2023, del Ministerio de Cultura de Colombia, para publicar nuestro segundo libro. La primera antología fue A 8 tintas, ¿verdad? Esa la hicimos con recursos propios, todo el colectivo, digamos, hicimos esa recolección de dinero para sacar adelante la primera antología. La segunda, nos ganamos la beca del ministerio y logramos sacar el segundo libro, también ya con recursos del Estado, y que fue una experiencia súper buena porque aprendimos sobre cómo postular propuestas para recoger fondos para publicaciones. También darnos cuenta, mucha gente nos decía, ay, ¿para qué se van a presentar a eso si eso se lo dan a los amigos? Eso no se lo gana a nadie, eso es con palancas, eso son con trámites. Y no, sin conocer a nadie, simplemente con nuestro trabajo, con nuestra propuesta, nos ganamos la beca, de la cual nos sentimos muy orgullosos. Algunos de nosotros también hemos participado en distintos concursos, en los que hemos obtenido algunos reconocimientos. Y ahora, en esta etapa del colectivo, a 2024, estamos impulsando los proyectos personales de cada uno, apoyándonos para que cada uno pueda publicar su antología o su novela. Pertenecer a un taller de escritura exige mucho compromiso, o sea, hay que estar conectados con el grupo cada 8 días, cada 15 días, asistir a las reuniones, participar de los seminarios, de los talleres y sobre todo hacer los ejercicios de escritura, porque es lo único que te va a permitir crecer como escritor. Tenemos a veces esa idea de que el escritor no debe practicar, no debe estudiar, sino que es una musa inspiradora, te sientas y todas las ideas salen, y no necesariamente. De pronto hay gente muy brillante, muy talentosa que puede sentarse y desarrollar una novela, no sé, en poco tiempo, sin prepararse. Y esos son casos excepcionales, pero si nosotros leemos la biografía de grandes autores, de escritores, todos hablan de una disciplina para escribir todos los días, así sea un párrafo, una cosita, leer a los demás autores, y sobre todo enriquecerse de lo que los demás están haciendo. Entonces ha sido un crecimiento de todo el grupo. Participar del taller ha sido una manera de crecer tanto como escritor como personalmente.
The next person I'm going to present to you is Cora. And Cora is one of the youngest members of the group. She's still a university student. And I want to present a short part of what she says so that you can understand some of the themes of this this latest collection of theirs. 445 is that.
Escribo, soy muy sensible al arte, lo esotérico, el misterio. Y como el apoyo de muchas personas, sobre todo como de amigos, ha sido muy importante también su habilidad de comprensión lectora en niños. Entonces como que la lectura en mí ha sido un pilar fundamental. Y en momentos en los que ha habido oscuridad en mi vida, el escribir o el leer también ha sido muy terapéutico. Y toda esta historia, como con mi papá, tiene también una influencia o un reflejo en mi escritura. De hecho, uno de los cuentos que publicamos, La Casa, está inspirada en él, y como este rol de cuidadora, de cómo cuál es el rol que tiene la mujer en la sociedad. Cuando tú estás cuidando de alguien más, el foco está en la persona enferma, pero nadie mira lo que está viviendo la persona que está cuidando a esta otra, como que deja su vida casi que pausada para hacerse cargo tiempo completo de alguien más. Y fue algo que yo viví siendo casi una niña. Entonces como en mi historia personal también se ve un poco reflejada en mi escritura. En cuanto a otros referentes ya más literarios, soy un poco fan de Marvel Moreno. Ella fue una escritora barranquillera, puede ser un poco predecible como aquí en la costa y demás, pero la verdad me gusta mucho Marvel Moreno y estas referencias que ella hace a la mujer y su rol en la sociedad. Hacía también mucha crítica a las clases sociales, sobre todo como al clasismo que había y que pues aún existe en esta ciudad.
So the third person I want to present very briefly is Carlos Segundo Barrera, and he's going to talk a little bit more about the way they go, about their process and the way the meetings work. Carlos,
escritores nuevos, estamos revisando de escritores de otros países, estamos haciendo ejercicios constantemente, estamos probándonos, corrigiéndonos entre nosotros. Para mí ha sido una experiencia súper grata. Hay diferencias de opinión, hay veces chocamos en ideas, hay diferencias de pensamiento, de tendencias, edades. O sea, tenemos 19 años, tenemos cerca de 70 años en otro de los miembros. Hay jóvenes, hay viejos, hay maduros, sabios, hay de todo, una variedad que termina siendo enriquecedora y además no solamente para la vida del escritor, sino para la vida misma, en el hecho en que tienes que fortalecer, hay veces, tu propio pensamiento, tu pensamiento crítico, inclusive tu tolerancia. Hay veces chocamos, como es normal, pero siempre encontramos el camino para enrutarnos hacia lo que nos interesa, que es la literatura. De un tiempo para acá he venido incluyendo en mis escritos referencias a botellas y a licores, referencias a destilados y a bebidas espirituosas, y eso no ha sido accidental. Tengo también otro hobby y es la reseña, la cata, la revisión y la investigación de bebidas espirituosas, de bebidas destiladas. Me refiero a whisky, a bourbon, a coñac, a tequila, a ron, al aguardiente, y he encontrado la manera, y quiero fortalecerla, de enlazar el mundo de los licores con el mundo de la literatura. Hasta ahora, ¿cómo ha sido? Aparecen botellas en los escritos, aparecen personajes interesados en conocer sobre licores, aparecen botellas que influyen en decisiones, en los personajes, pero quiero seguirlo fortaleciendo, quiero juntar esos dos mundos, el de Don Licores y el del escritor, porque creo que que hay un escenario de creatividad, de impulso, de suavidad, si se quiere. Esa unión puede ser mágica. De hecho, en el colectivo Brurrafalos hacemos catas literarias. Nos concentramos en esos dos escenarios. Probamos una bebida, conocemos su origen, su producción, sus aromas, sus sabores, y vemos qué activa esa bebida en nosotros al momento de acercarnos al papel y al lápiz. Ya llevamos 4 o 5 catas literarias. Yo jocosamente digo, son las primeras catas literarias en la historia de la humanidad. No conozco registro alguno de este tipo de ejercicio, y son ejercicios creativos maravillosos.
And the last person that I'm going to introduce you to is Viviana. Viviana is the leader of the group. She usually chooses when they're going to read something together or when they're going to do a writing exercise. She is the person that coordinates that. She's been in the group since 2009, and I want you to hear her talk about the role of being Colombian and how that comes through in her writing. So 3:25.
Me dice, ¿tú qué estás haciendo allá? ¿Qué juega, mi amor? Ella tratando como de saber y establecer vínculos con su hija y saber de qué es lo que a la niña le interesa. Le dice, no, mami, aquí jugando con las muñecas. ¿Y qué están haciendo? Ah, no, mami, mira, lo que pasa es que el hijo del dueño de la casa violó a la hija de la señora del servicio y ahora ella está embarazada. Y entonces mi mamá, bueno, niña, después hablamos. Entonces, eso eran las típicas cosas, claro, porque nosotros fuimos criados con las telenovelas. Entonces, teníamos muy clara que las cosas funcionaban de una manera casi, pues, digamos, muy drástica. Si alguien se mete conmigo, yo la tiro por las escaleras. Eso es una solución en la vida. Entonces, ese mundo, que es un mundo muy adulto, pero los niños estamos metidos ahí. O sea, ver la telenovela, tanto la franja del día, la noche, los programas, sea venezolana, brasilera, mexicana, lo que tú quieras, colombiana, ahí estábamos los niños mirando eso. Entonces, había unos temas que eran bastante fuertes y bueno, la manera también de asumirlos quedó en el subconsciente y eso ha ido saliendo por ahí. De hecho, un cuento ganador en el año 2018 en el concurso nacional de cuentos de la Cueva se llama Amores de Mentes y se trata sobre una mujer que plancha y ve telenovelas y se muere por saber qué va a pasar al final de su telenovela. Y pasan muchas cosas que tratan como de sabotearle ese momento mágico y digamos que logré captar ese espacio, ¿no? En esos 72 metros cuadrados donde yo vivía, donde convergían todas esas emociones y esas tensiones, digamos que tuve la posibilidad de convertir eso en algo positivo, ¿no? Lo malo que puede haber pasado se convirtió en insumo. Entonces digamos que esos son mis orígenes, de ahí vienen mis ideas y todo, y también de Colombia, ¿no? Colombia es un país que continuamente te está suministrando tanto cosas buenas como cosas malas, ¿no? Yo vengo de esa generación que vio cuando todo explotó, todo el tema del narcotráfico, las mafias, las bombas, los aviones bombas, la toma del Palacio de Justicia. También vengo de la avalancha de Armero, muy doloroso para el país, y un sinnúmero de cosas que pasaron al mismo tiempo que te marcan y uno está pequeñito y uno trata de entender por qué pasa todo eso en el mismo lugar, porque qué es lo que pasa con ser colombiano. Pero también tengo el recuerdo cuando vino el Papa Juan Pablo II y mi papá me llevó a ver al Papa Juan Pablo II y pasa ese señor en el papamóvil y es un señor así como, se veía como tornasol, yo no sé si es los ojos de uno de chiquito, se veía tornasol y tú lo veías y le estaban tirando agua bendita y no sé qué. Entonces yo sentí que había como una fe, como algo, una esperanza, algo en el que tú te podías agarrar, digamos que, y eso es muy colombiano.
Colombiana. So, my reflection on this collection is that it gives the reader a lot of insight into regional identity, the Colombian coast, and the historical complexity. You could hear in the little clips that I shared, the distinct voices. So even though they work as a collective, even though they read each other's writings, they meet every week, each one of the authors presents their work with a very distinct voice, and those come through in all the stories of the collection. And the range of stories is vast. They move. Some of the stories are funny and fantastical. Some of them are romantic. Some of them are tragic. Just from looking and listening to those four authors, you can see the different personalities, and you can imagine that they have different stories that they tell. So the stories that those authors tell in this collection are, Edna has the first story in the collection, and it's about a young Afro-Colombian girl who goes from having her hair straightened to rebelling against her getting her hair straightened and the consequences of that. In what Cora said, you could hear that she cared for her father when he had cancer and died, and her story is about the home and the house that she lives in, and it's infested with cockroaches, and she gets her hands on Raid, and it's one of the only things she can control are killing the cockroaches in her house. Carlos has a story about Count Dracula going to Barranquilla's famous carnival. He has in the story all the folklore of the carnival and a social reflection on the role of that kind of chaos that comes in the city. I want to end with saying that I was really grateful to be able to have this experience and be embedded with them. I've known about the collective for 6 or 7 years, and I had never been invited to go because you can probably hear from the stories that they tell that it obviously serves as a writer's workshop, but it's also a support group and a friend group. They have gone through many things. 2 of the group members died. One of the group member had cancer. Cora's father died. They have gone through a lot, and I was really glad that they were open. I think it helped me understand them as writers, being able to visit their homes. I visited the homes and conducted the interviews in the homes of the authors, and then also spending time with them. I've spent a lot of time in Barranquilla, but spending time with them and seeing Barranquilla through their eyes was really helpful for me in creating this series. So I'm very generous. I'm very very thankful for their generosity.
Thank you very much, Genny, for the presentation. Thank you. We're going to hold our questions for the end, please. Now we're going to have my presentation, but first I would like to introduce myself briefly. I am an associate professor of Spanish and chair of the Humanities Department at DeSales University in Pennsylvania. I hold a PhD from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. My research expertise lies in cultural and interdisciplinary studies of 20th century literature in Spanish. And I have published articles on Octavio Paz, Jose María Arguedas, Leopoldo Marichal, Antonio Scalmeta, and Jorge Enrique Adum. Additionally, I have published an article exploring the connections between Miguel de Unamuno's thoughts and those of the French philosopher Blaise Pascal. I am also author of the book Con el otro, la poesía comienza, which examines love and eroticism in selected poems of Rosario Castellanos. And my presentation is in Spanish. Rosario Castellanos, Bifurcaciones en su poesía erótico-amorosa. And I'm going to share the first poem first. Sí. Ajá. Okay. So, Rosario Castellanos, nacida en Chiapas en 1925 y fallecida en 1974 en Israel, donde fungía como embajadora de México, es una poeta, novelista, dramaturga y ensayista que ha despertado el interés de críticos y universitarios por ya varias décadas. Por un lado, sus novelas en las que explora el tema del indígena chiapaneco son material de estudio obligado para quienes quieren conocer al México rural de la primera mitad del siglo XX. Por otro, sus ensayos feministas son analizados cuidadosamente por quienes se interesan en los estudios de la mujer. Igualmente, sus poemas más conocidos como Lamentación de Dido, Misterios Gozosos, Autorretrato, Jornada de la Soltera y Kinsey Report se examinan también desde perspectivas feministas. Pero en este ensayo me enfoco en ciertos poemas que hacen referencia al erotismo. Una particularidad en la obra poética de Rosario Castellanos es que, contrariamente a sus combativos ensayos donde afirmaba una enérgica postura mujeril, la voz poética en sus poemas no siempre se identifica con un hablante femenino. En la antología poética Poesía no eres tú, obra poética 1948-1971, publicada al siguiente año, de los 34 poemas breves, es decir, de menos de 40 versos que abordan el tema del amor o el erotismo, solamente 7 asumen un yo poético claramente femenino. Entre estos, En el filo del gozo, publicado por primera vez en De la vigilia estéril de 1950, y Ninfomanía, que apareció con más de 2 décadas de distancia en Poesía no eres tú, en 1972. Estos textos tienen referencias eróticas problemáticas, abordan el tema del erotismo, pero con grandes diferencias que pueden atribuirse principalmente al momento de su publicación, como se explica más adelante. Si bien el sufrimiento y la amargura son las características más comunes en la poesía erótico-amorosa de Rosario Castellanos, algunos textos largos como Misterios Gozosos y El Resplandor del Ser, cito a Estela Franco, parecen apartarse por su temática justamente gozosa y resplandeciente del conjunto de su producción. Lo mismo puede decirse de En el filo del gozo, cierro cita. Incluso, aunque de una manera muy distinta de Ninfomanía, en estos textos Castellanos se atreve a desafiar a la sociedad patriarcal en la que se desenvolvía esa sociedad mexicana tradicionalista, que en muchos aspectos persiste todavía, que no acepta que la mujer pueda gozar de su propio cuerpo. Por eso, cuando Castellanos expresa la sexualidad femenina en sus poemas, es un acto de rebeldía y un intento de liberarse de las sujeciones machistas, que muchas veces fallan dentro de este discurso de Castellanos, y puesto que se enmarca todavía dentro de los límites de esa tradición, como se verá más adelante. En el filo del gozo es un poema dividido en 3 partes, donde la voz poética es un rotundo yo femenino que se dirige a un tú, al cual, a pesar de no tener marcas gramaticales de género, se reconoce masculino por algunos lugares comunes usualmente asociados con la relación de una pareja heterosexual. Por ejemplo, en los versos cito: venturosa ciudad amurallada, ceñida de milagros, descanso en el recinto de ese cuerpo que empieza donde termina el mío. Se utiliza la metáfora de la ciudad amurallada para representar el tradicional abrazo amoroso masculino que protege a la mujer. Pero en estos versos hay una renovación de la imagen del recinto, tradicionalmente asociado al espacio femenino, porque aquí el cuerpo del hombre es ese recinto donde el yo descansa después del contacto erótico. Esta imagen se refuerza con el deítico crepúsculo, que denota el final del día y en este caso de la relación erótica. Asimismo, el cuerpo del amado es una fortaleza que la defiende y la salva del peligro inevitable, la muerte que niega la vida que la sexualidad celebra. Cito el poema: entre la muerte y yo he erigido tu cuerpo, que estrella en ti sus olas funestas sin tocarme y resbale en espuma deshecha y humillada. La repentina violencia de la muerte y el hecho de salir ilesos de esta es otro cliché, el orgasmo comparado a la muerte, en la que sucumben en un instante. Pero se continúa viviendo esplendorosamente en el amor, puesto que la muerte se trastoca en espuma deshecha y humillada. Algunas secciones de este poema son una verdadera loa al gozo erótico. Por ejemplo, la gradación ascendente, cuerpo de amor, de plenitud, de fiesta, expresa el aumento de la emoción, del sentimiento amoroso que sube hacia la plenitud carnal y culmina en la fiesta. El apogeo erótico que, aunque poco duradero, puesto que son palabras que los vientos dispersan como pétalos, colman a los protagonistas quienes además proyectan su gozo en la naturaleza, de la tierra con su flora y fauna, al cielo y las aguas, cito, todo lo que la tierra echa a volar en pájaros, todo lo que los lagos atesoran de cielo, más el bosque y la piedra y las colmenas. Con una estrofa posterior de 2 versos entre paréntesis. Cuajada de cosechas, bailo sobre las ceras, mientras el tiempo llora por sus guadañas rotas. Cero cita. La voz poética hace una pausa que disminuye el ritmo de campanas delirantes a una danza paradójicamente inmóvil, ya que está cuajada, pero triunfal. Ella vence a la muerte, es decir, al tiempo, y se carga de los frutos de la naturaleza que pueden interpretarse como el placer erótico. Esta primera parte del poema esboza el contacto íntimo de la pareja, cuando la mujer se siente completa, feliz e invencible, protegida y amada, expresando en ceñida de milagros. Después de la unión, ella reposa contenta y satisfecha. La afirmación abierta de la sexualidad femenina y el reconocimiento de la voz poética de su propia capacidad de sentir placer y alcanzar la culminación son signos de libertad y poderío femeninos que, sin embargo, se fracturan en la siguiente sección del texto. La segunda parte de esta recapitulación de la relación del yo poético con su amado, violenta durante el contacto erótico y apacible el enamora. Convulsa entre tus brazos, como mar entre rocas, rompiéndome en el filo del gozo, o mansamente lamiendo las arenas asoleadas. A pesar de que la pasión femenina es arrebatadora y se revienta como mar entre rocas, la mujer asume un papel pasivo y sumiso ante el tú. Ella está bajo su tacto y bajo su voz, rindiéndose como palomas devotas y sumisas. El uso de un vocablo bélico, se rinde, refiere a otro cliché que hace de la relación amorosa una guerra, que en este caso es ganada por el hombre. La mujer se somete voluntariamente, ofrece la paz, palomas, y rendir pleitesía, devotas, a su rey amante. Un amante con una doble apariencia. Es una pared protectora, pero también es duro e impenetrable, según las imágenes que lo representan como murallas y rocas. Paradójicamente, la relación subordinada es gozosa, como el título indica y como se observa en la comparación del deseo sexual con la cacería. Como un arco en tensión palpitante de flechas y de agudos silbidos inminentes. En este pasaje se percibe el placer que está a punto de estallar. Además, esta imagen renueva otro cliché porque mientras que tradicionalmente la masculinidad es comparada con las flechas que se disparan, ahí ella es el arco y también las flechas prestas a ser lanzadas. Al mismo tiempo, ella es el perro de caza que olfatea la presa y el estrago. La autora cambia nuevamente los roles para hacer de la mujer, si no el cazador, al menos un asistente, el perro de la jauría, y del amado, la presa. Se presenta una nueva paradoja. El amante es a la vez la presa y el cazador. Ella se somete a sus deseos. Bajo tu voz, mi corazón se rinde. Pero también es el estrago, es decir, el daño y la ruina. Aquí la sexualidad es satisfactoria. Tu presencia es el júbilo. Y aunque el amado no está con ella permanentemente, la ausencia sirve para avivar el deseo que será colmado ulteriormente, puesto que el amante es el agua que calma la sed del joven siervo hacia el final del poema. Cuando partes, arrasas jardines y transformas la feliz somnolencia de la tórtola en una fiera expectación de galgos. Y amor, cuando regresas, el ánimo turbado te presiente, como los ciervos jóvenes la vecindad del agua. Al utilizar la imagen del ciervo para la mujer, se vuelve a la metáfora de la cacería, pero esta vez ella asume el papel de la presa. La diferencia es que en esta ocasión no presiente el peligro o el estrago, sino el sacio de su sed, metáfora de la satisfacción sexual. Por otro lado, el simbolismo del ciervo, según Juan José Cirlot, se asocia con la luz y la pureza, y al mismo tiempo es lo opuesto al chivo expiatorio. Así, Rosario Castellanos pudo identificar a su yo poético con lo elevado, pero también oponerlo a la imagen del chivo expiatorio. Es decir, la mujer sexuada se deslindaría completamente de la culpa que tradicionalmente las sociedades occidentales quieren imponer a la mujer que goza de su sexualidad. Si se acepta esta interpretación, el lector de este poema sería testigo de la lucha que la poeta libraba para emanciparse de las concepciones tradicionalistas en cuanto a la sexualidad, sin conseguirlo enteramente, como se evidencia por las imágenes y connotaciones negativas y tradicionales que da el texto. Por lo demás, este poema está construido con numerosos lugares comunes. Se debe recordar que es un texto publicado en 1950, cuando la autora apenas comenzaba su carrera literaria. Pero ello no merma la intensidad erótica y la aparente sinceridad de los versos. Es un poema en donde el lector se siente estrechamente cercano a la voz poética que parece hacer confidencias. En ese sentido, se puede decir que este poema tiene características intimistas sin ser necesariamente un reflejo de la vida real de la autora. De hecho, en una entrevista con Emanuel Carballo, Castellanos niega enfáticamente que su poesía sea autobiográfica. Cito: por el contrario, y desde el principio, el pudor me impide referirme a estos temas. Cierro cita. Y sin embargo, unas líneas después, en la misma entrevista se contradice. Cito: puedo decir que la mía es una poesía subjetiva, de experiencias personales poderosamente disfrazadas. Cierro cita. Con lo que la autora deja abierta la puerta a toda clase de interpretaciones respecto a la autenticidad de sus anécdotas. Tal vez por esto, en una entrevista posterior con Margarita García Flores, Castellanos aclara, cito: hablo allí de la vigilia estéril como si fuera una mujer muy vital, muy sensual, muy rodeada de amor y de pasión, y eso es pura y estrictamente retórica. Cierro cita. No obstante, coincide con Fabien Bradou cuando matiza el rechazo respecto al contenido autobiográfico de la autora de la obra poética, porque ésta se percibe, cito a Bradou, la expresión del deseo de ser de la escritora y una visión de sí misma, aunque esté totalmente desligada de la experiencia vital. Cierro cita. No se puede negar que la búsqueda de referencias autobiográficas en los textos puede ayudar a su comprensión e interpretación, pero en realidad no es estrictamente necesario por la independencia de los textos como objetos literarios completos o, si se quiere, por completarse al momento de la lectura, pero independientes de su creador. Castellanos estaba consciente de esto cuando comentó que lo que mueve a un escritor es, cito, recoger anécdotas, contar historias particulares. En realidad, buscar a través de esa anécdota única, de esa historia particular, una ley general, una manifestación que corresponda a la condición humana. Cierro cita. El intimismo de Castellanos es válido no por lo que tiene de personal, sino por lo que dice de la condición humana en general. Otro poema altamente sexual y gozoso es Ninfomanía, publicado en la sección En la Tierra del Medio de Poesía No Eres Tú. Este es el poema bastante más corto. Es un poema que podría considerarse oscuro, de no ser por el título, pero por ser lo primero que se lee en el poema, se entiende que se describe el contacto de la ninfómana con su amante. Aunque no se marca el género del tú, las imágenes lo refieren al género masculino. La autora utiliza el título de manera denotativa. Se trata de una mujer, una ninfómana, que por definición tiene un violento deseo carnal y nunca queda satisfecha. Por el contrario, el contacto la incita a repetir la experiencia interminablemente. Cito el poema: por este sabor neutro, tan insatisfactorio, que exige al infinito, una vez y otra, que se vuelva a probar. Cierro cita. La nuez, de cáscara tan dura y rugosa, con 2 hemisferios cerebrales, se puede interpretar como una imagen de los órganos masculinos, pero las imágenes son ambiguas y han dado lugar a diversas posturas de la crítica. Si se sigue la metáfora sexual, se encuentra cierta dificultad para definir la actitud del yo frente a la relación carnal, porque adopta al mismo tiempo un carácter enérgico y sumiso. Desde la primera perspectiva, se trata de una mujer que asume su sexualidad y su deseo de satisfacerla. Es una ninfómana que domina el cuerpo ajeno. Te tuve entre mis manos, la humanidad entera en una nuez. La imagen hiperbólica es paradójica, ya que por un lado, ese pequeño fruto contiene a la humanidad entera, comprimida en un acto sexual, en referencia a su poder reproductivo, y por otro, la tiene también entre sus manos, bajo su dominio. Esa lectura presenta a una mujer activa que toma las riendas de la relación sexual y asume el papel que tradicionalmente ejerce el hombre, el de comenzar y controlar el acto carnal, además de gozarlo sin necesariamente interesarse por el disfrute del otro. El contacto oral puede ser considerado como un acto que humilla y somete a la mujer, por la imagen de postración frente al amante, lo que se lee como un símbolo de sometimiento y subordinación total. Sin embargo, en este texto, la mujer no solamente tiene un furor uterino, definición de ninfomanía, que da la Real Academia Española, sino que intenta saciarlo con quien está siendo alabado. El goce es de ambos. De esta forma, la autora iguala los deseos de las dos partes involucradas en la relación y les propone satisfacción a uno y a otro. Por eso, en el primer verso, el verbo está en pretérito, que tuve entre mis manos, para mostrar que el hombre era solamente un objeto de deseo. Pero la relación se modifica y equipara en el desarrollo del poema. La voz poética va descubriendo su interioridad mediante el uso de oraciones nominales y otras en tiempo presente. Además, quiere rebasar las fronteras de lo superficial y, al descubrir que el deseo es correspondido, exclama jubilosa: ¡qué cáscara tan dura y tan rugosa! El aspecto externo no es más que el cascarón que recubre el interior anhelado que exige degustarlo al infinito. En Infomanía se ve un gran salto tanto en la forma como en el contenido de la primera y la última etapa erótica de Rosario Castellanos. La franqueza y simplicidad En el filo del gozo es casi hermetismo en Infomanía. El yo poético asume posturas muy distintas. Pasa de un papel bastante tradicional y pasivo, aunque dubitativo, a un rol activo y afirmativo. En Infomanía, el erotismo está más velado y en ese sentido es más poético. Si el poema de 1950, en el poema de 1950 la mujer temblaba bajo el tacto y la voz del amante, imágenes de deseo, pero también de sumisión, 2 décadas después lo toma entre sus manos y controla su propio placer, además de proveerlo en el otro. Aunque en esta última etapa se trata todavía de una oposición binaria y una lucha de poder entre los sexos, se nota una identidad femenina más libre y segura de sí misma. Tengo la certeza de que si la muerte no la hubiera alcanzado inesperadamente debido a un accidente doméstico en su casa de Tel Aviv en 1974, Rosario Castellanos hubiera seguido desarrollando una obra cada vez más combativa y liberadora de la condición de la mujer, que pasa sin duda por la aceptación y goce de su propia sexualidad. Gracias por su atención. Gracias. No sé por qué se me fue la imagen. Ya volvió. Bueno, pues coming back to the English section, now we're going to introduce our third and last presenter, Gina Hernandez. Gina Hernandez, is a lecturer in Chicano Latin Studies in the Center for Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity, by courtesy, and a director of Community Engaged Learning in the Arts at Stanford University. Hernandez earned her MFA in Theater, Film, and Television from the University of California, Los Angeles, a BA in History, and MA in Liberal Arts at Stanford University. She forged a career at Stanford, which began in 2001 as the first executive director of the Institute of Diversity in the Arts, which has become a national model for research at the intersections of race and diversity, social justice, and the arts. In addition to administering a multifold portfolio of curricular programs in the arts, Hernandez teaches courses of Latino visual community-based and public art. Gina has a long history of leadership in the arts beyond Stanford, having served as director of development of the Santa Clara County Arts Council, Cine Acción in San Francisco, and review panelist for local, state, and national arts awards, and as a participant in the Smithsonian Latino Center Museum Studies program in 2009. The title of her presentation is Visual Survivance, Chicano Murals at Casa Zapata at Stanford University, 1975 to 1989. Gina.
Wow, thank you so much, Maria Cristina. I appreciate that kind introduction. Let's see, can I share my screen to get us started? How's that? There we are. And can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. All right, let's begin. I wish to dedicate this talk to Rebecca and Toño Burciaga, the children of artists and educators. They managed the estate of their father, Jose Antonio Burciaga, and are archiving the papers of Cecilia Burciaga, their mother. Rebecca is a professor of Chicana and Chicano studies and education at San Jose State University in California. Antonio is a musician. The subject of my master's thesis, which was completed in 2023, is the production and historical significance of over a dozen murals at Casa Zapata, an undergraduate residence at Stanford University. My goal with this project was to extend the collection's visibility and provide these murals a critical context for the interpretation as art and as a mode of cultural reclamation. I started this project with two main interests. First, I wish to explore the arts from frameworks that would allow investigations into indigenous knowledge systems. My second goal, which I remain very passionate about, was to write about this collection of murals housed at Stanford in this undergraduate residence that have been largely critically unexplored up to this point. The results I share today is my analysis of this public art as a collective and effective means of indigenous knowledge creation. So this is Casa Zapata. The community-based works here were painted in an ethnic theme dorm, Casa Zapata, over a few decades. And they remained hidden actually in plain sight for almost 40 years until, sort of hidden in plain sight. As you will see, they are quite bold and dynamic and so hard to remain invisible, but critically unexplored is what I mean. They were created in this community space intended at creating a sense of ethnic theme education of Chicano and Latino culture, and also to create an important sense of belonging for the residents, about 50% of which are Chicano or Latino heritage students. As such, they become part of an enclave within an enclave of its own sort at Stanford. These murals are collectively devised and stewarded outside of the confines of the university art structures. And more significantly, they offer an indigenous foundation to the presence of Mexican and Latino student experience at Stanford. Most were painted between, as my talk says, 1975 to 1989, which coincides with the advances of the Chicano movement's efforts to diversify higher education and push to enroll greater numbers of Mexican American and Latino students at Stanford and across the country at colleges and universities. I should add here that the dorm name is Casa Zapata, after the Mexican revolutionary leader Emiliano Zapata, who with Pancho Villa led the peasant rebellion in Mexico's revolution in the early 1900s. The paintings adorn the interiors, hallways, stairways, the dining hall, which we'll see interiors and exteriors, and we'll see here in the breezeway of the courtyard that connects from the right side, where we just were, with a mural by Juana Alicia, to the left, which is the dining hall south entrance with this triptych in the middle along the way. Most of these murals were painted in the 1980s, when Jose Antonio Burciaga, who I mentioned, and his wife Cecilia were the resident fellows at Casa Zapata. Resident fellows are sort of professional adults in residence who supervise and administer to the ethnic theme in an educational and cultural sense. They're also professional staff. I myself have served as a resident fellow at Casa Zapata, which really juiced this project. So during the height of the mid to late 1980s, artist Jose Antonio Burciaga created ripe conditions for a high volume of mural production, which my talk discusses. But before I go too far into my arguments about this collection, I wish to give you a feel of the space. So this is the outside courtyard. Again, there's a lovely garden. The dorm is on the right, the dormitory buildings where the bedrooms are. through the breezeway and into the south dining hall. Here's a bit of detail about the triptych by Ray Patlan and Eduardo Pinedo in that courtyard. And then entering the dining hall to the immediate right of the south entrance, one is confronted by Zarco Guerrero's A History of Institutional Racism and Violence in the Media. These three large faces of women, one young, dark-skinned, one blonde yet faceless, and one old and wrinkled and perhaps implicating. You cannot escape their presence. They are literally the head portraits. Each are about my height, about 5'4", 5'5". It's a full 9x12 piece hanging on the wall there. And you cannot escape their presence of these women. On the far left wall, showered in the sunlight of the floor to ceiling windows, is a replica on canvas of La Vida, La Muerte, El Mestizaje, Los Cuatro Elementos, a mural that was created by Francisco Epens in Mexico City in 1952 at the Autonomous University in Mexico City, UNAM. Its colors, there it is in UNAM. On the left is the Stanford interpretation. Its colors fading at Stanford, but its references to the educational institutions of Mexico and the tradition of murals and teaching history at that Mexican institution are clear. At Casa Zapata and UNAM, students are linked in the presence of this painting. Here's the close-up of ours. We don't know who did this replica. It was most likely a student, and again, most likely sometime between the late 70s and mid 80s. At this point, one enters the center of the dining room, and Jose Antonio Borciaga's historic triptych, The Mythology of Maíz, The Last Supper of Chicano Heroes, and The Cycle of Life, imposes itself boldly and offers the indigenous foundation of humanity from the beginnings of time. The piece I show here is The Mythology of Maíz, which references Jose Antonio's interpretation of the Mayan creation myth as depicted in the Popol Vuh. So combining scholarship on decoloniality and that with Native American and Mexican American literary analysis, artist Jose Antonio Borciaga was also an author of 5 books and collections of poetry and essays. So using this analysis, I posit that these Casa Zapata murals are relevant to the project of indigenous presence. In his reading of the poem, The Aztec Priest's Reply, in his book, Signs of the Americas, scholar Edgar Garcia argues that the response of the Aztec priests to the European travelers to the Americas at the moment of conquest signaled this persistent presence and set the stage for the continued evolution of the population of this hemisphere. The setup of this speech, which I'll share a bit, is the point at which the Franciscan friars demanding that the priests collect the pueblo in the center square and acknowledge the end of the Aztec civilization at the hands of the Spanish Christian conversion project. I quote, "What we say here is for its own reason, beyond response and against our future. Our revered lords, sirs, dear ones, take rest from the toil of the road. You are now in your house and in your nature. Here we are before you, subjected in the mirror of yourselves. Our sovereign here has let you come. You have come to rule, as you must in your own place. Where is it you come from? How is it that your gods have been scattered from their municipal centers? Out of the clouds, out of the mist, out of the ocean's midst, you have appeared. The omneity takes form in you, in your eye, in your ear, in your lips. So as we stand here, we address the one through whom everything lives, the night, the wind, whose representatives you are, and we have felt the breath and the word of our Lord, the omneity, which you have brought with you. The speaker of the world sent you because of us. Here we are, amazed by this. You brought this book with you, his script, heaven's word, the word of God. And now what? How is it? What are we supposed to say? What shall we present to your ears?" That's Edward Dorn from Derelict Air, collection Out, a collection of his poetry. And I use that there to posit for us, what would be a theologian's final message to its conqueror? How would one convey to his faithful subjects that the inevitable end to their empire should not be feared? Radical poet Edward Dorn reflects on the indigenous impressions about this final stand of the Nahua people at the hands of the Spanish conquest through this translation of notes of just such an event in this poem. I should add that this is a very short excerpt that I shared for time, and this work is over 100 lines long. So what is it about indigenous time of presence? The written narrative we have of colonialism, of course, is that it started after conquest and subjugation of indigenous populations at the hand of European travelers to the American continent, and continued through its violent stage roughly until the 19th century, in which it continues on in the colonial order in its steady and present persistent state. During colonization and its most violence, modern estimates indicate that more than half of the indigenous population disappeared or died due to disease, warfare, and starvation from the dispossession of its lands. This devastation is believed to have a significant impact on the indigenous population, and historians have debated the numbers of the native populations in the Americas prior to this contact for decades. Most acknowledge the extreme and rapid decline in the population, but what is remarkable is not only this decimation, but rather that the indigenous lived on, and likely in larger numbers than was once believed. Elizabeth Fenn, a historian of smallpox, counters that narrative of indigenous decimation when she says the point is not so much in the numbers of the population that disappeared in the process of contact and colonialization, but rather that indigenous people survived. Fenn comments, quote, "In the long run, the consequential finding is not that many people died, but that many people once lived," unquote. Her evidence is convincing, and that it insists that scholars think again about this critical period in the history of the American continent. Fenn sort of flips the point of view a bit to consider that if so many died, not to discount that, during the initial violence of conquest, it would mean that such people no longer exist. Fenn argues, though, that since so many survived, indigenous peoples must have had extensive and proven systems to ensure their way of life, sustaining themselves and their culture. So, Casa Zapata's murals are large in scale, many on the facade, as I've shown, interiors and exterior walls of this undergraduate residence. They are not separated at all from the community living spaces. In fact, many are in bedrooms, in community common spaces of the residence, including stairwells, basement spaces, in addition to the dining hall and student lounges that I've shown. Notably, these works were not commissioned by the university, as I mentioned, through any formal channels. These paintings were produced by the guests invited by those living in the residence itself, and often with students' participation in painting them. They are not considered art holdings of the university in the traditional art production sense or acquisitions of the university museum. And this is foundational to assessing the impact of indigenous ideas found in the murals, which my study engages, and often, as seen in this piece called The Spirit of Hoover, done largely by students' hands, is in some ways a critique of the educational research mission of Stanford University and its Hoover Institute. It was done in this late period of the 1980s. And so recognizing an indigenous presence creates the potential to make visible how indigenous knowledge formation remains active. Native scholars such as Fenn have identified this perspective as a narrative of presence. For example, this continued existence of indigenous people, despite significant depletion of the population of natives, not to discount that fact at all, is central to Gerald Visnor's work on survivance. Survivance is a term he engendered within literary scholarship to not only describe the fact that North American native populations have indeed survived, but also speaks to the stance, the posture, and means through which the presence of native peoples continues into the colonial body in the current moment, and moreover into the future. That is quite like the stance of the Aztec priests in Edward Dorn's poem. Emphasis on this continued presence drives my project. A notion of indigenous presence is fundamental to this analysis of the Casa Zapata murals in that they echo, reflect, and evoke the past within the present. More to the point, these works created decades ago live in the past of their own specific context of production, and also in the individuated moments of current times and contexts. In this project, I apply Visnor's ideas of narrative literary survivance to develop my notion of visual survivance in the case of an understanding of Casa Zapata's murals. So back to the work Signs of the Americas, in which literary scholar Edgar Garcia provides this detailed account of the Edward Dorn poem recovered from the Aztec priest's verbal response in 1524 to the Spanish friars, whose attempts at Christian conversion were needing to be dealt with. In one edition of this work, Dorn titles it The Aztec Priest's Reply. I mentioned it's in Derelict Air, a collection of his poems published sometime around 1975. In that analysis, Edgar Garcia claims that the utterance of the priest's 1524 response signaled a persistent presence and set the foundation for a continued indigenous evolution of the population of this hemisphere. This evolution is not only one of conquest and subjugation, but also the story of an amalgamation of humanity into new forms, intimated through an understanding foretold through Aztec and Mayan cosmology. For Garcia, indigenous time is ever present through indigenous oral poems, inscriptions, and signs. He specifically refers to the Aztec priest's reply, elsewhere known as the Aztec priest's speech, notably in Image of the New World, the American content portrayed in native text by Gordon Brotherston. But Garcia refers to this text, which was translated back to Nahuatl by way of Spanish translations originally captured as the recorded notes of events, presumably at the fall of Tenochtitlan. Gordon Brotherston, I mentioned, the scholar of Latin American native literatures, revived and published Nahuatl script and a chronology of these events. And later with poet Edward Dorn, reconstituted this original Nahuatl speech of the Aztec priests, likely taken from notes notes that remained, and also Toltec and Mayan screenfold manuscripts, and then translated it back into English. This poem then, mediated extensively across languages and centuries itself, serves as a metaphor of the collapse of time that Garcia points to in his work. Edward Dorn formalizes this work of translation into a poem published in English in his collection Derelict Air, which I read from. Yet, this original speech itself was noted to have taken place hundreds of years earlier. The Spanish note takers presumably knew some smatterings of the Nahuatl language to make reference to the speech. The notes were then transported, archived, I believe, in Austria first and then Spain later for hundreds of years, until Brotherston and Dorn reconstituted the speech back to Nahuatl, translated again into English. Then we can enjoy Dorn's editions of poetry here today. And Brotherston's meticulous research and double translation confirms Garcia's accounts of the story of this poem in his analysis of literature as an example of such signs of the Americas that transmit indigenous knowledge over the full span of colonial history. Such an example of text and speech mediated over multiple ages and artistic inventions is the recurrence and persistence of indigeneity in cultural production within the framework of indigenous notions of time. Aztec Mayan cosmologies, we know time revolves around the turning of the earth, repeated in cycles of being. Knowledge creation recurs and returns in kind. So linking Garcia's analysis as well to these Chicano murals, I argue that these works of art are also signs of continued presence. Importantly, the murals' insistent presence at Casa Zapata at Stanford and their explicit indigenous themes and imagery represent both their own past and at the time of the treatment that my project points to, 1975 to 1989, and our own consistent contested present in dialogue with current generations of students and community. Edgar Garcia's work with the Aztec priest's poem points to a process where times are not limited to a past or some future ideal. Instead, each time, each generation of still present indigenous ways of knowing finds its uses in current generations as much as in past ones. For Garcia, time collapses, and there is not a linear ideal it moves toward. It is fractious, of course, always contested, and one of the multiple current moments in which humanity will find itself. If the Aztec priest's foretelling was correct, there will be indigenous ways in the future as well. Not perfect, not fully realized, yet ever present. I tie these ideas of survivance and indigenous presence to the ongoing insistence of the collection of murals at Casa Zapata that contain Mayan creation stories, imagery of pre-Columbian deities, elements of the land and animals that frame the cosmology of the Americas, and indigenous presence. These Chicano murals established an indigenous knowledge system within the highly regulated elite institution of Stanford University and is a distinct outpost of visual survivance. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I
Thank
will
you
stop.
very much. That's very interesting. I thank you very much, Jenny and Gina, for your presentation. And I don't know if we have some questions from the audience. We could see a lot of diversity of expressions of art, but I think that is giving us an idea of the diversity that exists in the arts and culture of Latin America, in the United States, and of course in the countries of origin. And so, if you would like to ask a question, a comment, maybe not a question, just a comment.
Gina, can you share your presentation is that possible? Could you also share your presentation? Because I absolutely love those murals, and that's a topic. I live in Mexico. I'm teaching in Mexico, and
Wow.
a
wow.
lot of the topics that you touched on and talked about, they're going to come up in my class starting tomorrow.
Oh, wow. Well, that is really soon. Well, I'm excited, and I appreciate Matthew recording the session.
Yeah.
So I know that that will be something available to yourself and anyone else who's interested in revisiting some of the ideas. Let me know if any of the images are particularly interesting to you. Again, I have beautiful images of these works.
Yeah. I had a question also, since we're talking about Gina's presentation, and it's as questions one way or the other are often turned back around to the questioner's pet interests, and that is that I'm currently working on a project that started off to some degree as a memoir, but became more of a family sort of biographical thing about, in part, my last name's Biberman, and going kind of up the family tree and over to Herbert Biberman, who was a blacklisted
I knew it.
filmmaker, and his brother, though, Edward Biberman, who, among other things, was a fine arts painter, but a muralist. Who,
wow.
Yeah, he had a mural in the Venice Beach post office. He had a mural. I mean, he submitted for murals, and he had two accepted, during the WPA years, and then one at the LA Federal Courthouse, both of which are no longer up. And I think both of which were removed sort of in the height of after his brother went to jail in 1950 during the McCarthyite period. And he apprentices himself to Diego Rivera, and his name is like Siqueiros, I think is the
Siqueiros.
Yeah. And so
that totally tracks, because someone I've had the opportunity to learn from and work with is Judith F. Baca. She's a muralist from Los Angeles, and she mentions some of the way in which her organization, the Social Public Art Resource Center in Venice, was supported by the Bibermans. So
really?
that what you're saying tracks. Yeah. Yeah, interesting, fascinating. I mean, I imagined that you were going to refer to a familial relation to Herbert Biberman, since he's so large in our history and consciousness politically, but I didn't know about Edward. So thank you for that info. Yeah, but it tracks, because Judy does talk about other artists' support and activity in the area. Spark is in Venice.
Yeah, it's quite fat. Or one of the things that I think is underappreciated about Herbert Biberman's Salt of the Earth project, which is a pro-union docudrama.
Yep, I know it well.
And it is that Edward Biberman's Sonia Dahl, his wife, was the sort of producer on scene of Salt of the Earth, and Edward was in and out. And I think that a lot of the approach to shooting that film in black and white was inspired by the type of mural art and approach that we were admiring via your presentation, which is just a kind of gut feeling, you know, now that I've really sort of dug in to the work, that when you look at the appreciations of Salt of the Earth, nobody, you know, says this, but it's just a feeling that I have as a researcher.
I mean, I love that film. I went to film school. That's definitely part of some of the background that I bring to this visual work. And I know the film well. I'm going to have to go back and take a look at it again with this in mind. Thanks for the comment. I mean, I think you're onto something there. I haven't seen the film in years, but one of the
Edward also trained with a Roscoe as well. He went up and helped him with the Dartmouth.
Yeah. Not many, but several have referenced an institute. Siqueiros didn't run it himself, I believe, but there was a David Alfaro Siqueiros Institute that Judy Baca mentions and folks have been going to for decades, in which just the technique of the point system has been transmitted to US based artists from Siqueiros. Yeah. So that tracks.
Gotcha. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Gina, I have a question, or I don't know if it has been studied, because I am Mexican from Mexico City, and so these murals are like so familiar to me. I mean, they are everywhere, and we study them all the time, and they are in schools and really literally everywhere. And I wonder how other people, like here in the US, in the Casa Zapata, how do they react to that presence of the Mexican, not Chicano or Latino, or just being Mexican, and indigenous like Nahuatl or Maya, not, I don't know, from Inca or something else. How, if there is like a reaction, like how is it? I know that there are not like murals only in Mexico, but I mean, it's an important tradition there.
Well, you know, it is broad and mixed. I mean, Stanford is a unique place. On the one hand, it's there are few murals on the Stanford campus. The two places that have the most concentration of them are the Chicano and Latino centers, right? One is a student center itself, has, you know, a handful. Casa Zapata, which was created a few years before as an ethnic theme dorm for Chicano and Latino culture, has many more. It was created in 1972. The student center was in 78. You know, so this again is the height of the Chicano movement, or the tail parts of the decades of the Chicano movements period, where art movements kind of propelled some of the ideas and causes of the movement. I talk about that in my work. You know, it's a long and interesting history, but it tracks that there is this fervent of political activism on US college campuses, and those places, those sort of enclaves that I mentioned, within a place like Stanford has those repositories of mural art in them. There's some other student mural arts which are, you know, just more one-offs. These are a collection. I discuss these as a collection of that particular period. So that's on the one hand. The other hand is, you know, murals like this exist certainly in other countries globally, but also in US cities, you know, all over the country of the United States. You know, there are major cities. Any major city will have its own kind of Latino enclave where muralism is quite profound. Multiple works, multiple artists, different periods and ages that they cover. So in some ways, it's very, very familiar to our student populations, that if they've been anywhere, they've probably seen communities where mural culture is really rich. But you come to Stanford, it's sort of hidden. Again, it's an ethnic theme residence. Half of the participants are familiar by at least some tangential culture. Others, it is sort of new and shocking. And they wonder about why why at a place such as this at Stanford would there be so much visual imagery? You just go to the other parts of the dining hall, even in the space that I showed you, and they have some framed, you know, creative art you could buy at a department store. Nothing like this that I've shown. So it is sort of shocking. In particular, the one that has repeatedly had a lot of provocation is two of the works. One is Jose Antonio Borciaga's, which interestingly is that Last Supper, in which he depicts the Last Supper of Christ and puts Che Guevara in the space of Christ. So that is very provocative, and students all over the map react and respond to that. That's one. The other one is the faceless woman who is blonde, and we don't know if she's Latina or not. But a lot of the general population students take issue with that particular face and are trying to understand it. In my experience, those visual provocations tend to be some of the best learning experiences to engage students with because of what they respond to, perhaps. Then there's other students who kind of forget that they're even there after the year is gone. It's like, oh yeah, Zapata, we have all, they just sort of. So the reactions are very wide ranging. And in fact, as difficult as some of the contested areas that I sort of referenced and I spent some time with in my project, the contested things, the provocations that students take up sometimes become those rich opportunities to bring back this history, or at least debate it in our current times. And that's another kind of its own recurrence that I think speaks to the same idea. It's not always pleasant, and the current generations take issue with various aspects, not only of the the presumed nationalistic stance of the Mexican national project as depicted through its great muralist, Los Tres Grandes, as its way of silencing indigenous populations, and also the failings and shortcomings of the Chicano political consciousness as they understand it today. So those are all great educational opportunities that these murals provide, and we, include in the response and reaction. And then there's the university itself, which doesn't recognize these as art holdings of their institution. They're kind of in this other realm, this other space, a residence. It doesn't track to the museums, but that's changing. That's hopefully becoming more of a conversation.
Interesting. Thank you very much.
I have a question for Genny. By the way, it's a great panel. Thank you so much for all your presentations. The question is, what does Brurrafalos mean, and what is the interpretation? Why did they choose that title?
It's made up. It is it's a little sad. They were making a joke when they first came together, that they were like the like the búfalos on those Picapiedras, the Flintstones show. They were making jokes. They were like, we're a lodge, we're a fraternity, but they were all women. It's very recent that they're men in the group. And the person that one of the people that started the group, everyone called her the bruja, because she read tea leaves, and she wrote about reading tea leaves. And she, the bruja, is one of the people in the group, one of the two people in the group that have died of cancer in the past 5 years. And the other one was named Rafa. So it's Bru and then Falos. So it's a made up name, but un homenaje a sus miembros.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I was just having an idea and a comment, Genny, because you are now in Mérida, in Mexico. And in Mexico also, and I am not sure how much it is like a phenomenon more like in big cities, this tallerear, no, like do these workshops where people come together with very different views. Sometimes there are, like, I remember when I lived in Mexico, like the workshop for poetry only, or the workshop for only for narrative, or the one for like everything, or for drama, or for many things. And if they have, if you are aware of some groups there in Merida, which is also a big city and a university city, and if they have contact with all those other groups now that with you, I mean, because of you having contact with those.
So that's interesting. So yes, there are absolutely groups here, talleres here, and I work on a university campus. And then I work closely with a community center where they bring in educators. They have open mic night for people to read their poetry. But they only have a social connection with some of the members that from the group in Colombia, and just from a social visit, but not as an arts exchange. But just now, we also at my college, we have a really long-standing relationship with a hip-hop group in Havana, Obsession, and members of that group were just here, and they made a point to make all kinds of contact with artists. So Mayan women that embroider, people that make that do dance groups. They made all kinds of contacts with them so that they can. So, but it enriches both sides, but sort of setting up those kinds of channels. And I think informally, for sure, that's been happening, but there's not a specific connection between the Brurrafalos and the group that we work with here, which is called Habla. Habla has all kinds of talleres. They have one coming up right this next weekend for educators.
Well, interesting now with all the technology that we have, it's so much easier than before. Getting a book was already an odyssey, but now technology has facilitated so many things. Thank you very much. Do we have other comments from the audience?
I just want to say I loved your presentation, and I'm so glad that you let us record it, and I hope you let it stay in the recording, because if I were explaining to a graduate student how to analyze a poem, how to analyze poems together, I would say, just listen to this. This is how you do it.
Thank you very much. That's very nice.